wasn't going to comment on this, but something struck me, and I want to try to organize my thoughts. So this is going to be a little rough, but hopefully this will make some sense. There's this phenomenon in the church, and I'm using that term universally in just the church overall, and I call it folk theology, and it's a set of beliefs that kind of grow up in certain environments that may or may not be true, actually. Let me see if I can illustrate a little bit of what I'm talking about. Very silly example, but at Christmas time, we talk about how the angel choir came to the shepherds, and of course we have all kinds of Christmas carols with angels singing, hark the herald angel sings. And what's interesting about that is that there's no mention of singing. In fact, the angels went away saying. And I heard one pastor years ago make the comment that as he was looking through the text, it appears that there's no singing in heaven until human beings get there, which I thought was kind of interesting. I haven't dogged that one down, so I don't know how accurate that is, but it's an interesting thought that we have this sort of notion that there's this angel choir that's singing, and the text doesn't really support that. We also see this quite a bit in Catholic tradition, especially around certain times of the year, certain saints, the parades that involve the Virgin Mary, and there's a folk theology that goes along with that, praying to saints, praying to relics, that sort of thing. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deep, but it's a folk theology. It's not necessarily something that I think the Vatican would endorse, but local congregations have ways of expressing themselves. Okay, so it's a folk theology. It's not necessarily a systematic theology or even a practical theology from at times. And the reason why I'm thinking about this is because I think personally that's how Bethel Church gets into trouble. So this has been a really interesting January 2026 now into February 2026, and the Christian YouTube journalist Mike Winger had a big expose on Sean Bowlz. Bethel Church issued an apology, and the internet's trying to sort all that out. Now, there are some actual theological pieces of the New Apostolic Reformation, of which Bethel is a part, that I got some issues with. At the same time, I don't want to throw baby out with the bathwater, because I do think Bethel Church and some in their sort of similar line of thinking have done some good things. But there is this, I don't even know how to describe it. There's a culture there that tends to elevate certain individuals because of their giftedness. And I think I'm going to call it that. And interestingly enough, that tribe, I guess that's what I'll call them, that tribe elevates those who are apostles and prophets. So Ephesians chapter 4, he's given some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, right? For the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, right? So some folks call those offices, others call them gifts. I'm not sure any of those are super helpful. But there is a role that those words describe, call it. But within that new apostolic reformation, this idea of apostle and prophet are elevated. They are the leaders, and there's a kind of a quiet, unspoken contract that they're also not to be questioned. And it's frankly a folk theology. It comes out of the text, but then takes on kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It takes on a life of its own. And sometimes that life isn't really biblical. So that folk theology ends up corrupting churches that are frankly doing good work. And for whatever reason, this seems most prevalent within charismatic or Pentecostal churches. Now, I'm not throwing shade on Pentecostals. I got Pentecostal brothers and sisters that I love dearly, and they love Jesus, and they want to do good in the world. And so I'm not trying to disparage the whole movement. But it does seem to affect that movement more than others, and that's worth paying attention to. There are some folks like Alan Hirsch, a few others, Neil Cole, that are attempting to get their minds wrapped around, what those 5 ministry areas, like sometimes called the fivefold ministry, in Ephesians 4, they're trying to understand that a little bit better and what the implications are for the church. So I do think that the church needs that. There needs to be, I'm going to call it this, it needs a correction. And because there's good work in the name of Jesus that's now it's now all suspect, and that breaks my heart, because I don't, people who did receive miracles and prophecies that were life-changing, I don't want to cast doubt on any of those things, if it's really helped people, because that is kingdom work. But there is this idea of folk theology, and this is where we need to make sure that we're doing the biblical work of crafting theology and I suppose doctrine too. But I remember a professor explained to me that you can either be a theologian who reads the Bible, or you can be a Bible scholar who does theology. And the two, they have to coexist. And the other thing, I'm probably introducing a whole new topic here, but the other thing that troubles me is that I feel like in some cases when it comes to certain folk theologies, they're built on a single passage in the Bible. Not always, but often. There's this single passage, and this whole folk theology kind of explodes around it. And I think that's where we need to be careful. We have to do the hard work of allowing the text to interpret itself, which is just good academic rigor, right? And my encouragement to all of us today is to always go back to the Lord, always try to check in with Him, and find out where things are going off the rails, and ask Him about it. And then to continue the conversation among pastors to really kind of sort through what we see in the text and what we believe that the Lord is saying. So this is a call back to rich theology, right? Good biblical exegesis, doing the hard work of wrestling with the text to make sure that we're truly following what the Lord wants us to do, and not trying to get big churches or more influence. I don't even know. I can't speak to Sean Bowlz or Bethel's or Todd White's agenda or motivations. I have no idea about any of those. But I do know that for me and those who, I hang out with, I think we need to double down on our biblical chops. So, probably more to say about this, but this is really on my mind. I want to make sure that I made some kind of a comment about it, and find out what the Lord's stirring in you. Grace and peace.